G'day legends, I hope that you are having a fantastic day and a fantastic week. What we're going to be talking about today is something a little bit different, but it aligns with a lot of what we talk about here, which is that the leader of the Conservative Party, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak of the UK, has announced a plan for national service for 18-year-olds. We're going to break it down, look at it, and look what it actually is. Now, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Willie OAM. I served in the infantry for a number of years. I deployed to Afghanistan alongside the British Yorkshire Regiment and the 1st Irish, one of which took a dump in one of our Australian air conditioners. I'll never let you live that down. And I'm an OAM, a Queen's Order of Australia Medal. It's similar to an OBE if you are a Brit. And we're going to break this down. We're going to look at the doctrine of large-scale war. But first, I want to say this is a political move by a bunch of blokes who never themselves actually signed up to join the armed forces, with an exemption of a few politicians. These are the men who will be sending young men to die in a war at some point. And this is an attempt to drive votes for the Conservative Party, who just announced a vote. And this isn't a bash on the Liberal, Conservative, left or right parties. Everyone does moves, whether this or something else, whether it's military, national service, or climate change, or this or that. Regardless, it comes down to getting votes at the end of the day. But all of this comes in the wake of just huge shortages of personnel within the armed forces. And this is across the entirety of the Five Eyes country: Australia, America, the UK, Canada, and New Zealand. We just cannot get people. We cannot keep people. There are ships stuck in harbour without enough seamen to even take it bloody out for a cruise, and the Army and Air Force are severely undermanned. So my question is, Rishi, who's going to be training these tens or hundreds of thousands of people coming? So let's look at what he has announced, and we'll look at the pre-war period said by the UK as well.
We have so much to be proud of in Britain, but one of the problems in our society is that we have generations of young people who don't have the opportunities they deserve. Britain today faces a future that is more dangerous and more divided. There's no doubt our democratic values are under threat. That is why we will introduce a bold new model of national service.
So my take would be democratic values are under threat around the world. Of course, the majority of the world is not democratic, but a lot of democratic values are actually at risk from within nations as well. And the opportunities for young people, if you're talking about like the real estate market, God knows, but there are a shitload of opportunities for young people out there, and a lot more opportunity and a lot more spheres than our parents or our grandparents had as well.
18-year-olds to be spent either in a competitive full-time military commission over 12 months.
So 12 months of training, full-time.
Or with 1 weekend per month volunteering in roles within the community.
So significantly different. So you're either be full-time military or volunteering a weekend a month.
Like delivering
somewhere.
prescriptions and food to infirm people, or in search and rescue. Young people will gain valuable skills, make our country more secure, and build a stronger national culture. This ambition benefits our country and our young people alike. Just look at Sweden, where 80% of young people completing national service say they'd recommend it to their friends. Uncertain times call for a clear plan and bold action to chart a course to a secure future. Our plan will ensure new generations and our country meet the challenges of the uncertain world. Keir Starmer and Labour don't have a clear plan and won't take...
So, and at the end, a key for votes. But talking that young people to get the skills, get this and that through national service, full-time military duty, or through something else, which I can see the plan of. And this will attract voters, particularly older voters, going, hey, these young people, we see what's happening, and the military has this amount of discipline and this and that. But as someone who served the military, who's training them? You're going to have tens, hundreds of thousands of people, and there are people of which you don't want to take on to train either. And my question here is, if you're not having people sign up to join your military, whether it's UK, Aussies, Yanks, maybe it's a reflection of your governance and policies for people wanting to defend these rather than just people not then signing up. Maybe all the trans flag waving, the white man evil sort of campaigns we see in the West doesn't translate into the recruitment of young men willing to fight and die for the nations. Our nations are more interested, it seems, in diversity and inclusiveness into the military than actual combat effectiveness. And this is reflected through the quotas that are set at recruitment, lower standards, and special programs that are only open to some. Not me. I like how everyone else I've served with, everyone, could not give a single fuck for what colour, gender, religion, sex they were next to, as long as that person was the best person for the job and had met the same standards as himself or herself. At the end of the day, in major war, we're not talking Afghanistan, we're talking like we're seeing in Ukraine and Russia, you're going to have a massive attrition with huge losses. And if you want over the top of the trench killers, I'm sorry, but you're not going to get them with the current state of events and how people see this. And as a veteran myself, I'm vehemently against conscription, as I believe it is up for the governments of the day to set conditions of a nation so that young people want to defend it if needed, or go to war around the world to then uphold its values. And I know this isn't conscription, but when you have the UK heavily involved in a war against Russia and the Defence Secretary Grant Shapps saying things like, I'll show you, this is exactly how people see it. So this only came out the other day. Defence Secretary Grant Shapps said that the UK needs to be prepared for war. Earlier the week, Shapps said the country was moving from a post-war to a pre-war world, and that our adversaries are now more connect with each other. Now, when I talk about that I'm against conscription, I find it very, very differently. Conscription of defence of a country, like say what Ukraine is conscripting, and conscription of to go somewhere and then fight. But let's actually talk about, now that I've bashed this a bit, let's talk about how this may actually be a good plan when we look at how the next wars will be fought. Now, if you want to look at my video I've done fully breaking down conscription, go and watch this one. It breaks down the problems that we would have conscripting now that maybe we didn't have 50, 60, 80 years then ago. Now, conscription is a cruel nature of warfare. But as we've seen in both Ukraine and Russia, they have had to resort to conscription as the war has worn on. And with Ukraine imposing bans on men 18 to 60, even then leaving the country. Now, that video I discuss all of that, but I also discuss why it may not work. And the past is not a reflection of the future. Now people are far more informed. Political and mental and poor physical fitness will instantly make a large percentage of people just unrecruitable off the bat. And people have even pointed towards immigration and saying, well, where will the alliances really lie if push comes to shove? As we've seen in Ukraine and Russia, industrial capacity is one of the biggest issues too. The West, NATO delivered just over 50% of the million promised shells to Ukraine, and North Korea delivered 1 million in a few months. North Korea did. An autocratic third world country. Our industrial capacity could not live up to a large-scale war. But let's look and defend then some of this. So this came from General Sir Patrick Sanders, and this caused a lot of stir maybe 6 to 12 months ago, saying a speech on Wednesday was framed as a warning that war against Russia could not be based on the size of the UK's 75,000 full-time regular army, that needed to be then larger. The NATO's war in Ukraine showed that a civilian army is needed. Regular armies start wars, citizen armies win them. And we will then talk about the doctrine that backs this up. We need an army designed to expand rapidly to enable the first echelon, resource the second echelon, and train and equip the citizen army that must follow. So that professional army first, training and equipping down the line, the reserves, then your citizens to then fight the war. Exactly what we're seeing that Ukraine and Russia are doing now in an extended then war. Now this comes from another but Australian article, but it's still fits what we are speaking about. Finding numbers of well-trained and experienced personnel required will be hard. In major conflict, many of the peacetime professionals will have been lost in early operations, or sent rearward to train the follow-on forces hurriedly formed. So you will lose peacetime professionals, that you will have massive losses in the opening days of war. The doctrine says it will take a long time year and a half, 2 years to actually build back up then to be back onto offensive actions. But you will have a massive loss in the peacetime professionals. And we'll look at doctrine and how NATO and other doctrines may be better suited. Today's young Australians might arrive en masse in times of extremes, but they are unlikely to easily fit within last century's models of force expansion that tend to assume all are identical, compliant, and able to be easily slotted into traditional military force structures. So let's look at actually this force generation. There are two main models: NATO, Western armies, and Soviet model, with most states fielding something in between. NATO armies are highly professional, backed by a strong NCO corps. I was an NCO and I left the military. With extensive peacetime military education and experience. These are professionals. It's your full-time job for years and years. Their professionalism for their military doctrine to stress individual initiative, delegating a great deal of leeway to junior officers, NCOs. NATO formations enjoy tremendous agility and flexibility to exploit opportunities on a dynamic battlefield. And this is what you see in asymmetrical warfare, in Afghanistan and areas like this. You have this peacetime professional, but that was not attritional war. In attritional war, this method has a downside. The officers and NCOs required to execute this doctrine require extensive training and, above all, experience. Army NCOs take years to develop. Typically in the Australian forces, 4, 5, 6 years before you will be an NCO. A squad leader generally has at least 3 years in service, and a platoon sergeant at least 7. We're a couple more years on that in Australia. In attritional war characterised by heavy casualties, there simply isn't time to replace lost NCOs or generate them for new units. The idea that civilians can be given a 3-month training course, sergeants, chevrons, and expected to perform in the same manner for a 7-year veteran is a recipe for disaster. Only time can generate leaders capable of executing NATO doctrine, and time is one thing that massive demands on attritional war do not give. So this is the problem with a war with NATO doctrine. You have a small military, very highly trained, but you lose numbers of that. You've got a small military that's very highly trained, but so hard to then replace, where the Soviet doctrine was the exact opposite of that, and therefore the massive failures in maneuver warfare that we saw earlier on in Ukraine when it was a maneuver war. So both have pros and cons, but in attritional warfare, you can make up your own mind. The Soviet Union was built its army for large-scale conflict with NATO. It was intended to be able to rapidly expand by calling up massed reserves. Every male in the Soviet Union underwent 2 years of basic training right out of high school. The constant turnover of enlisted personnel precluded creation of Western-style NCO Corps, but generated a massive pool of semi-trained reserves available in times of war. Now, this is what Rishi and his government and his leaders are looking at. You have semi-trained reserves. This is what Switzerland have. It's what Israel had, whatever, for national service. You've got semi-trained guys. They've been out of the army for a couple of years. It's a lot easier if you step into a war to get those guys back up to a good standard than starting from nothing. The absence of reliable NCOs, this professional army NATO doctrine, created an officer-centric command model. Less flexible than NATO's, but more adaptable to large-scale expansion required by attritional warfare. So, say, as a corporal, I'd be one of 8. I'd have 7 guys then below me, where in Russia, Soviet, whatever, you'll have an officer to many, many more guys. Of course, it's not as flexible, it's not as adaptable, but it's much quicker to spin up more people in that type. However, as war progresses past 1 year mark, frontline units will gain experience and improved NCO corps is likely to emerge. It's exactly what we're now seeing in Russia happening. The massive, massive losses, massive tactical, strategic stuff-ups we saw for the first year and a half of the war, we're not seeing that amount anymore. And it has now emerged. We're seeing more of these small team tactics being used now that we've changed into attritional war. Remember, all war eventually becomes attritional. A key difference between the models is NATO doctrine cannot function without high-performing NCOs. The Soviet doctrine was enhanced by experienced NCOs, but did not require them because based on having then, of course, large losses too. The effective model is a mixture of the two, in which the state maintains a medium-sized professional army together with the massive draftees available for mobilisation. If those draftees, though, have a level of basic training, makes it far quicker. Professional pre-war forces form a high end of its army, becoming fire brigades, moving sector to sector in battles to stabilise the situation and conduct decisive attacks. Low-end formations hold the line and gain experience slowly, increasing their quality until they're given a capability to conduct offensive operations. Victory is attained by creating the highest quality low-end formations possible. This last key is incredibly important. And we're seeing both Ukraine and Russia do this. In Chasiv Yar, in Bakhmut, we have the Russian VDV as the primary fighting force there. But Russian Spetsnaz, their special forces, are coming in and they are helping stabilise the situation, lead command, and conduct then decisive attacks. Similar to what MRTFs did, say in Afghanistan, you have ANA troops. They're the ones attacking, but you've got sprinkled in guys from NATO NCOs to run that as well. And Ukraine is doing the same now up in Volchansky. What they're doing up there is they've got their regular forces there, and then they're leaking in better trained special forces element troops to lead the situation and to conduct then the attacks in here too. The units should also have professional soldiers and NCOs brought in from the pre-war only to add professionals. Exactly what we're talking about. No formation should be allowed to fall below 70% strength. It's advisable to disband several pre-war high-end formations to spread professional soldiers among newly created low-end formations in order to raise the initial quality. So getting experience on the front line, but you need to have those never fall below the 70% with professionals in there to then raise that quality. And because you're having high losses, though, those that are surviving, they become the experience and then they go off. So these low-end guys at the bottom gain experience on the front line, so on, so forth. Like painting the bloody Golden Gate Bridge. It's done by the time you're at the other end. You need to restart. But attritional war, high losses, loss of professional militaries in the beginning, exactly what we'll see. The West is not prepared for this type of war and kind of war. And I've been in the Western military for years. Trust me, we're not ready for huge, huge losses. Look at Russia's losses. 1,000 people a day. We don't know what Ukraine's are, but on some days of this at least claimed. But we're not ready for that. That's a battalion a day, more than a battalion a day. Would last a couple of weeks. To most Western experts, attritional strategy is counterintuitive because they spent too long in areas like Afghanistan on manoeuvre asymmetrical warfare. Historically, the West preferred a short, winner-takes-all clash of professional armies. Recent war games, as a war over Taiwan, covered a 1 month of fighting. The possibility that war could go on never entered the discussion. The reflection of a common Western attitude. Wars of attrition are treated as exemptions, something to be avoided at all costs and generally products of leaders' ineptitude. Unfortunately, wars between near-peer powers are likely to be attritional. We know these powers have a lot of people, a lot of industrial capacity. It's going to last then a long time, thanks to a large pool of resources available to replace initial losses. The attritional nature of combat, including the erosion of professionalism due to casualties, levels the battlefield no matter which army started with better trained forces. As conflict drags on, the war is won by economies, not armies. States that grasp this and fight such a war in attritional strategy aimed at exhausting enemy resources while preserving their own are more likely to win. The fastest way to lose a war of attrition is to focus on maneuver. And this is my primary critique of Ukraine right now, is I don't think Ukraine has accepted that they are in an attritional war, massive mobilization, heaps of stuff in. I think they're still trying to outmaneuver Russia rather than fall back in areas you need to buy time to attrit down then the Russian forces as well. Unfortunately, many in the West have very cavalier attitude that future conflicts will be short and decisive. This is not true for reasons outlined above. Even middling global powers have both the geography and population and industrial resources needed to conduct attritional war. The resulting war will become attritional and will favour the state which has the economy, doctrine and military structure that is better suited towards this form of conflict. Now, I don't agree with forcing anyone to do anything that they don't want to do, such as sign up and fight. And as you can see in these, and these were from even before this announcement, of people that would actually sign up and would not volunteer and would refuse being the largest among men 18 to 40 men and women 18 to 40 as well. But at the end of the day, this actually strategically from a military point of view to have a large pool of which is semi-trained people to call on in that time for attritional warfare and future warfare, I can see. But I can also see why people are outraged at this because of the pre-war era that we have been told from parent champs that we are in. And people are going, well, what war? What war are we going to enter into? And you could just imagine the fallout of people's own opinion. Imagine if it said we're going to the Middle East. Well, there's going to be a lot of people who are vehemently against that, same in other ways as well. And I think a lot of this is coming that we may see a direct conflict with Russia within Ukraine at some point. Honestly, I think that, or we will see down the line with someone like China, both of which are, massive military powers, industrial bases as well, and that war would turn into attritional, exactly like we have seen. Now, this question was asked as well, if someone refuses to do either of those things, would they go to prison? If not, now, he does say in this, he doesn't give any details on it, but he said, no, they won't go to prison, there'll be something else to do. So if you go, you should be rewarded, but you shouldn't be punished for not. So I don't know exactly how that would look. I know this is probably being very wordy, unprofessional maybe, but that's just my opinion on all of this. I can see the strategic element in realistic, how successful would it be? Well, the decisions are going to be made by people who didn't do it, people that may not have even signed up to do it, and voted in by people that aren't going to be expected to do it either, if that makes sense. You're going to be 17, you can't vote for something you're going to have to do next year, voted by some 6-year-old who's like, fuck the younger generation, they're undisciplined. And it's not that I disagree with that, but it's the way that it will be. Legends, I wanted this to be quicker than this, but look after yourself, have a great day. I'll speak to you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.